be available. The notes from today will be available to all of you as well as to the subcommittees so that they can really integrate this into the work that they're doing. So I'm going to turn it over to Jane, I believe, or Liz.
Evening, everyone. I'm Jane Lazorchek. I work in the Climate Action Office within the Secretary's Office of the Agency of Natural Resources. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us tonight to learn a little bit about the climate planning done to date, as well as some of the recommendations that are being considered by the subcommittees this time around in service of the update to the Climate Action Plan. I'm joined by some of my colleagues from other agencies tonight to lead you through that component of the presentation. But for now, I just wanted to ground us in the work that we're doing, the timeline, and where this input session feeds into the critical path that we're on to updating the Climate Action Plan midway through this year. So if you're not aware of it, in 2020, in September of 2020, the legislature in Vermont passed the Global Warming Solutions Act. That law took, first and foremost, what were goals that had been on the books for almost 2 decades in Vermont around cutting our climate pollution and made those statutory obligations. So it looks at how we cut our climate pollution around 3 different target dates. The first of which comes this January 1st of 2025. And then the next one, which is a much more aggressive cut and is roughly half of cutting our climate pollution from its biggest year back in 2005, and is aligned with the Paris Climate Agreement, which is an international agreement around the steps we need to take around cutting climate pollution in order to foster sort of to slow down the speeds of climate change and hopefully stop irreversible harm of it. So that target in January 1st, 2030, is what this plan is sort of striving to be a roadmap for. As I said, first and foremost, the law was emissions reductions, but we know that climate change is here and that we're feeling the impacts of it now. And Vermont is sort of a very small piece of the overall climate pollution that our country produces and the world produces. So even if we are successful in meeting those statutory obligations, there are still critical components around climate action, looking at how we invest in resilience and adaptation, our natural and working lands for all the critical services they provide us, and how we think about our communities to bolster resilience and adaptation in the face of climate change. So here we are marching on the path. The first climate action plan was adopted on December 1st of 2021. Every plan there going forward is every 4 years, and the date changes from December 1st to July 1st. And this one we are 6 months away from, and the idea tonight is to start to discuss some of the ideas being considered for recommendations and really hone in on some of the areas that we're focused on, both climate pollution, resilience and adaptation, and natural and working lands, around actions that municipalities can take and services we can provide to capacitize towns to be able to do that. Next slide. Yeah, fancy animation. So, in the spring and summer of 2024, the Climate Council, which is actually the body responsible for preparing and adopting a climate action plan, state government works in service of supporting this outcome, but it's really the Climate Council's responsibility to adopt and put forward a plan that meets the objectives of the Global Warming Solutions Act. That Climate Council is comprised of 8 administration officials, secretaries like the one of Agency of Natural Resources where I work, but also secretaries across other agencies that all have a stake in climate solution, Transportation Agency, Public Service Department, Ag Agency, Vermont Emergency Management, and others comprise those 8 administration seats on the Climate Council. And then there are 15 legislative appointments who represent different sectors that are either have a stake in climate solutions, like the renewable energy seat, or feeling the impacts and are important to think about the solutions needed, farm and forest, municipalities, and others. So that Climate Council, which meets in an ongoing basis, really kicked off the work in earnest last spring. And put forward some broad strokes objectives of what this update to the plan would look like. And those subcommittees, which you'll hear from the 3 drafting subcommittees around recommendations tonight. There are 5 subcommittees, the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee, Rural Resilience and Adaptation, Cross-Sector Mitigation, and then science and data and just transitions support the broader work across all of those bodies. Those are really the ideas and ideas, technical experts. Those are the people who are really putting forth substance for the Climate Council to consider. Those groups have been hard at work over the summer and this fall, drafting those recommendations that we're going to talk through some of them tonight with you, with the idea of putting that forward to the council later in December into January, where the council will compile a comprehensive draft climate action plan for us to take on the road and talk to Vermonters about this spring. So there's been engagement throughout. We had kickoff meetings back spring. We're having these input sessions right now, 8 of them around different topical areas, this being around municipal interests. And then we'll have more robust consultation around the complete draft plan. That said, I think there's one more click on the slide, if I'm correct. Yes. So acknowledging that it's really important to talk to Vermonters, not just when we have something we think of interest as them, but to build relationship with Vermonters, to have trust and people to engage with at times of deep plans like this and important plans where we want their input. We're thinking about community engagement all the time around climate action because these plans, the recommendations put forward within, requires big changes the way we live on the landscape. And we want to make sure we hear from Vermonters about what that means to you and how we can represent your ideas and thoughts in these plans. So thank you for being here tonight. I think the next slide will just orient you. Oh, we are here. Yeah. The next slide is just going to say that the 3 subcommittees, agriculture and ecosystems, cross-sector mitigation, and rural resilience and adaptation, are really that substantive bodies of work, as I just mentioned. And that we have representatives from each of those who bring their expertise tonight to share with you a sample of some of the actions they're thinking about that we think would be of most interest to you. So I think right now I'm going to turn it over to Billy Coster, who is the Director of Planning and Policy and also in my agency of Natural Resources, and also co-chairs the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee, to go through their recommendations first before turning it over to another colleague to walk you through.
Great, thanks, Jane, and thanks everyone for being here this evening. I'm sure after would have been long days. So as discussed, as one of the substantive subcommittees of the council, I'm the co-chair along with Jael Pulskamp, who is a farmer from the Worcester area of Washington County. And we're in the process of trying to identify priority actions to advance to the Climate Council for them to consider beginning in December as they work towards updating the plan in July. Our purview is very broad. It looks at how our working in natural lands can help reduce and mitigate climate emissions through the storage and sequestration of greenhouse gases, and how greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced, especially from our agricultural sector. And it looks at how we can invest and set actions forward that make our land-based industries and stewardship more viable and resilient in the face of climate change, and also looking at what sorts of practices we can deploy across our working in natural lands to build climate mitigation, resilience, and adaptation in Vermont. The Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee had over 150 proposed actions in the initial climate action plan. So instead of trying to go through all of them or even a large sampling of them here, we just have this one slide that shows some example pathways, strategies, and actions that may resonate with municipal interests. To give you an example of the sort of work that we've done. And I really encourage you to look at the materials we have up on our website to see the full breadth of pathway strategies and actions we're considering, so you can provide your feedback to us in the near future, as well as tonight. So for instance, we have a pathway focused on increasing and maintaining the role of Vermont's natural and working lands in the mitigation of climate change. One strategy under that pathway is to increase tree cover. We know trees do an excellent job storing and sequestering carbon, even as forests could be managed sustainably for forest products. So an action there that has a municipal nexus is support for programs that increase urban tree planting, because we know that both provides those climate mitigation benefits, but also helps communities be more resilient with shade trees that address the heat sinks that that often emerge in our more urban areas. Another example pathway is one that focuses on sustaining, restoring, and enhancing the health and function of our lands and waters. Very high level pathway. There's a number of strategies and actions that fall under that. But one example here that speaks to some municipal interests is increased resources for technical assistance, capacity, and education. And at the municipal level, that could take the shape of an action that supports assistance to municipalities to fully implement Act 171, which was a law passed by the General Assembly a number of years ago that authorized towns to plan, including their municipal bylaws, provisions to protect forest blocks and connecting habitat. Let me see here. I have a couple other notes. Some other actions that might be relevant and interested to municipalities are strategies and actions that relate to municipal land use regulation. There are a number of actions in the existing plan that speak to Act 250 reform, and expansion of state floodplain and river corridor standards, the regulatory framework for energy generation siting. Some of those actions did move forward since the last plan was adopted, especially this last legislative session, where we saw some fairly significant modernization, Act 250 and future land use mapping at the regional and municipal level, and the Flood Safety Act moved forward. But there are still actions that are pending. We'd seek your input on. Another category relates to municipal and regional planning. The reference to Act 171 earlier, and opportunities under the Act 250 modernization law to really use those regional future land use maps to chart a course for a more climate resilient future. Lastly, a lot of our subcommittee's focus is on land conservation and efforts to protect and restore our natural infrastructure. Recommendations such as support for the 30 by 30 conservation planning bill that was passed, and expansion of programs that restore and protect riparian areas and floodplains. So these are all areas that have a number of strategies and actions that fall under them that may have some nexus with work of municipal bodies, both in your role as land use regulators and through conservation commissions and other community groups. So that is a high level overview of our work, and I'll pass it on to our next presenter. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Melissa Bailey. I'm the director of the State Energy Office at the Public Service Department, and I co-chair the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee along with Climate Councilor Rich Cowart. The Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee is responsible for developing recommendations that will put the state on track to meet its Global Warming Solutions Act emissions reductions. So in plain language, we need to come up with policies and actions to achieve greenhouse gas reductions and work across the sectors. Subgroups working on transportation, thermal, and electricity. Like ag and ecosystems, cross-sector has dozens of recommendations under consideration currently and from the last plan, but we're going to highlight here those that are most relevant to municipalities. So starting with the thermal sector, there's a recommendation to expand weatherization efforts for both residences, businesses, and municipalities, and that's a carryover from the previous plan as well. There's a placeholder here for the actual number of additional buildings to be weatherized. Previously, the state has a goal of 120,000 homes comprehensively weatherized by 2030, and currently we've reached about 40,000 homes to date. For municipalities, we understand there's significant interest in efficiency improvements that can be made within your own facilities, and understand that the MERP program was significantly oversubscribed. So many towns and cities have projects essentially teed up from the audits that were conducted under those programs, and so there's an interest in securing additional funding to expand those existing programs. The second strategy, I'd say we're still refining the recommendation related to building energy codes. The goal is increasing compliance with codes. And of course, there's a spectrum of options there in play, from trainings and incentives on one end of the spectrum to essentially establishing an enforcement regime, which Vermont does not currently have for our building energy codes. There will also likely be a thermal sector recommendation related to the clean heat standard, and a plan B if that clean heat standard does not go ahead after the legislative session this year. Moving on to the transportation sector. One area of focus relates to reductions in vehicle miles traveled and a need for a sustainable transportation plan that would implicate collaboration with municipalities. And I would say this is recommendations around land use and compact settlement are kind of an overarching theme within the climate action plan. And this is one particular pathway that's coming up in the transportation context. Just so you have a more full picture, other recommendations in the transportation sector relate to continuing the existing electric vehicle incentive programs that the state has, supporting the build out of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, promoting alternative transportation options, multimodal transportation, and the need for a potentially an overarching transportation policy, such as a cap and invest or clean fuels requirement that ensures that we get emissions reductions in the transportation sector. The final sector I'll touch on briefly is the electric sector. In Vermont, our electric sector is extremely low emission greenhouse gas emissions. Essentially is seen as a supporting sector in that maintaining an affordable and reliable electric supply will be necessary to support electrification of transportation and thermal. So as we switch more and more of our energy uses to the electric sector, the committee is focused on keeping electricity both affordable and reliable. The pathway that's highlighted here is about supporting reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity sector. As most folks are probably aware, Vermont's renewable energy standard was reformed during the past legislative session and puts Vermont on a trajectory towards 100% renewable electric supply by 2035. The remaining action here of interest again to municipalities relates to a report due from the Public Service Department to the legislature with recommendations for expanding community renewable access. We know that there's an interest from municipalities in accessing solar now that virtual net metering has essentially gone away in Vermont. And so that report will be forthcoming. So look forward to hearing from you all on your feedback and input on these recommendations as we further refine them. I will pass it on to the next presenter.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Campion. I'm Executive Director of the Windham Regional Commission and was appointed by the Speaker to again serve as the representative of municipal government. I was appointed to the council when it was first started, and took a couple of years off and was reappointed again this late September. So I'm actually still kind of getting my legs under me for this latest round. And I do serve on the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. And one of the things I'm going to go through these, one of the things I would like for municipalities to ponder, especially from a rural resilience and adaptation standpoint, is one of the things that you're going to see here, a lot of actions relate to tools for use by municipalities. And one of the some bits of feedback that'd be really helpful to get is what is it that you as a rural municipality can actually do? And is the climate action plan proposing to give you the right tools to do it? So like, are we proposing to give you a robotic arm and what you need is a chainsaw? So think about, what it is what work these actions here and strategies. Some of them are existing in the climate action plan. Some are proposed, but think about what it is that you as a municipality can really do. And just for context too, Vermont is inherently rural state, but the rural continuum in Vermont is much more finely grained than it would be in most states. So like in our region, our town with the largest population is 12,000. Our town with our smallest population is Somerset with a population of 6. So we know throughout the state, there's a lot of variation, a lot of capacity variation. So just something for you to ponder. And you don't have to give all the answers right now. Just, as you look over the plan, give us feedback. So first pathway is increase capacity for climate resilience, planning and implementation, and address inequities of under-resourced communities. For a strategy, provide tools and resources to help communities assess climate vulnerabilities and create climate resilience plans. And so we talk about creating a climate planning toolkit, hub for existing tools, resources, information. Develop municipal climate planning framework and guide. Expand capacity for the state to train on and support use of municipal climate toolkit, to development materials and assistance. Align the municipal planning and resilience grant program with the municipal climate planning framework and guide. And this last one is really esoteric, but establish permanent dedicated funding for regional planning commissions to cover overhead costs related to their application for and management of hazard mitigation grants. That's a really weedy item, but what it is for towns developing hazard mitigation grants, VEM has to go through a really tortured process to get you access to those grants. Because in order for the RPCs to help you, there's federal rules that don't allow us to capture the full cost. So that's a really kind of esoteric item, but it would make getting the hazard mitigation grant support to you guys a lot easier. Next strategy, increase community participation in local governance and support civic engagement and citizen involvement. One of the items that was actually implemented was codify the ability to conduct meetings by remote means, and that actually happened. But one of the actions that hasn't been done yet is support development, coordination of community stakeholder networks aimed at planning and implementing locally relevant climate resilient programs. Next slide. Another pathway, proactively and strategically invest to enhance resilience in transportation, communications, water, wastewater, and energy infrastructure statewide. Strategy, create a policy, planning, and organizational foundation to support effective investment in infrastructure resilience. And I would add to this infrastructure period, because so many of our compact settlements don't have any community water or wastewater infrastructure. And we need to be thinking about that, especially as we hopefully are going to contemplate growing up and out away from flood hazard areas. Action, improve, and promote the recently developed vulnerability index methodology, which hopefully you've been connected to through your regional planning commission. Let's see. Strategy, increase resilience of critical infrastructure to severe weather and other climate change threats by improving system efficiency, reliability, and redundancies. The action, develop revised language for actions related to investment in planning and implementation for source protection, pollution reduction, regionalization, and solar and storage. One item I'll note here, we've had a lot of focus on floods of late because, of course, we've had a lot of floods of late, but now we've had these ranging from severe to abnormally dry conditions. And we're seeing to our neighbors to the west that significant wildland fire is a real possibility. And as is limitations on drinking water, recharge of aquifers. We need to be mindful of the full spectrum of what can happen. Strategy, create a policy, planning, and organizational foundation to support effective investments in infrastructure resilience. And actions, develop revised language for actions related to investment in planning for those things. Next slide. And this is the last slide. Ensure that all people have access to safe, accessible, energy efficient, and affordable housing. We've had lots of conversations in Vermont about, thanks, Kevin. We've had a lot of conversations in Vermont about housing. This is another one of those areas where I would really encourage municipalities to think about what can you actually do to encourage housing development and what support do you need to do that. And lastly, address climate change's impact on health. Communicating risks to public health due to climate change that relate to exacerbated hazards. Emphasize the importance of mental health services, especially for those who have experienced the trauma of disaster. And prepare municipalities for a more active role in communications. And that is it, I believe, for me.
Awesome. So we're going to move into the discussion part of this, and we'll probably take like 3 to 5 comments, and then we'll take any, answers or additional information from subcommittee members. And actually, can all of the subcommittee members give us a wave so people know who we have here from the subcommittees? You guys are seeing those hands. Thank you. So we'll take comments and we'll get some answers. And, we have a pretty good group here and we want to hear from everybody. So if you can just keep your comments to, a reasonable length. And, we're also here to hear diverse perspectives, which is, great. And so let's just make sure to keep the conversation respectful. And yeah, so I'll read out the questions. How can the state support municipalities in advancing climate action? What do municipalities need to further address climate action at the town level? Where is action of most interest to municipalities? Is it resilience, adaptation, nature-based solutions, mitigation? Capacity has emerged as a key theme. Do you agree? And where would resources be most helpful to support municipalities? Okay, I see. Ooh. I'm not sure whose hand went up first. Sorry.
Arlena?
Yeah.
I thought I would just, as a prompt, say that for folks participating tonight, these questions are meant to just be a guide. They're things that we're thinking about when we're thinking about municipalities, but, and I asked Liz chat so we could drop the screen and all see each other better, and then really want you all to refer to them if they're helpful, but any comments or questions that you have more specifically about actions for the subcommittee members that or others of us who can jump in, we'd be happy to do that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Very, very good point. Lorraine?
Hi, yes, thank you for hosting this. One of our roadblocks is really the governance model of our commission, our planning commission, and the chair, in terms of really leaning hard on building grand list with businesses and constantly giving waivers. We struggle with waivers that are on over 20% grades. We can't get an energy coordinator, even though it's an energy, there's in statute that you can have one, among a host of other things like our forest plan and trying to reforest and things like that. I don't know if there's any guidance we've been trying this for 10 years to move the needle locally. And when I joined like an statewide ethics hearing like this, there were many municipalities that were stuck with the same thing. And really what happens is our developers rule. Here, the developers own a lot of land, the developers have the deeper pockets, and it is very difficult for us to move on action. I'm also working HVAC and plumbing, and the other struggle I have is not seeing businesses also being weatherized as well, or a way to incentivize that too, because there's so much leakage that way. If anyone has any ideas or solutions, I would love to hear it. Thank you.
It's really interesting to hear, Lorraine. Thank you for that. Ken?
There we go. I was in the earlier session, but I came so late, I didn't really see the whole question part of the thing. So I can now participate a little more intelligently. I wanted to talk a little bit about the agriculture transportation part. One of the things that I think is very important is, and I do believe transportation is one of the biggest contributors to emissions. I think it's number 2, if I'm not mistaken, after energy production. So one of the problems, of course, we have is Vermont at one time was a very agricultural state, producing a lot of its agricultural products locally and consuming them locally. Transportation, of course, creates emissions. So I would like to see some programs added to the climate action plan that encourage agriculture locally for production locally and consumption locally. That would mean supporting things like closed air systems, for example, where products can be stored over the winter and used. I know that those are systems that are used around the country. It would be nice to have one in Vermont. Um, revolutionizing the way we deal with butchering of animals at this point, where when right now we have to transport animals to a distance. It would be great if we could enable portable meat processing that could go to where the animals are, which would be very efficient, obviously, and reduce some emissions. I would love to see programs that either subsidize local production or mitigate risk. Agriculture is a very risky venture. Basically, with climate change coming, it's going to be even more risky. I think that's something that the state could offer is very some kind of reasonable crop insurance or production insurance where the risk can be lessened. So farmers would be encouraged to produce. One of the things I'm also concerned about is, I hear that, we're trying to encourage housing. I'm not against encouraging housing. We have to understand and balance that more housing is going to increase emissions. And the places that housing tends to go tend to be agriculturally productive areas. Those flat areas and well-drained areas are the ones that are attractive for housing. So, although of course it's difficult to prevent development and is being encouraged, as you know, one thing we can do is make sure that when housing is put on prime agricultural lands, that agriculture will be permitted there, even if it becomes an urban area. We've had some problems in Essex Junction. You may have heard about them. They've hit the state newspapers where there's in an urban area, a small farmer who, and if you don't know, you can be considered a farm by the state if you just simply produce a certain amount of product. It doesn't require size. You can have a farm on a quarter acre. So those are things that could possibly be done where towns could not prevent agriculture on prime agricultural soils, regardless of the housing that's there. Some of what I said about agriculture could also be applied to industry, of course. You support industry. It's of course, we support industry. It's great. It does increase grand list, increases the state's GDP, but it also exacerbates transportation because industry transports raw materials. And of course, when they produce products that are used nationwide or worldwide, they get transported out. So I'm not sure that much can be done in that area, but encouraging industries that produce products that are used and consumed locally and use local raw materials, of course, is something that possibly could be subsidized and encouraged. I don't want to monopolize. I don't see any other hands per se, so I'll keep going if you want. Please, people, raise your hands and I'll stop.
There actually is another hand for Lori.
Oh, good. Then I will stop.
But please feel free to get back in the.
I'll let it go around, and if I see more hands, then I'll join back in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. There was a lot of really great.
Yeah, I have a lot of bricks, and I'm sorry to dump them on you.
Lori, do you want to go?
Yeah, hi there. I'm Larry. I'm a volunteer in Middlesex, and with the Town Energy Committee, and my wife happens to serve on the select board, so I hear about municipal stuff a fair amount. I think one of the kind of the key things that you mentioned on your question slide was capacity, and I see that our wonderful Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission person Sam Lash is here, and Sam has been a great support, but I suspect that we could use a few more Sams to cover the entire Washington or Central Vermont region, and so, a town like Middlesex with a small volunteer select board and under 2,000 inhabitants, I think is fairly representative, and we just don't have the expertise. And we've been going through, for example, looking to redo our town hall, and we went through the whole MERP assessment, trying to do our best along those lines, and then didn't get any of that funding. And I feel like we just need much more coherent guidance and just kind of agreement as to what is the state of the art with building science. Our local folks just, generally don't know that much, and they're leery of, investing in a more efficient building. So other aspects that are in the climate action plan that I was reading from 2021, such as, improving and making a statewide building energy code is great. I think we need that to support municipalities so that there's one message, and that builders and architects are on the same page and not questioning each other, and having, select board members who just aren't informed, not able to support those kinds of endeavors. So and then, we've had floods here the last 2 years. The town is just trying to raise money for covering those things. And so again, it's a capacity issue of just dealing with multiple issues. And so having, like the CVRPC, the closest thing to a county level, entity helping us out would really go a long way to providing that kind of capacity. So, and then I think the other thing about the building efficiency and high performance building goes to the other aspects that have been discussed of just providing housing. And while it's not necessarily a municipal issue, again, we're relying on our zoning administrator to tick the box on the energy code compliance for new construction. And I don't believe that that's particularly effective. Housing coming in to Vermont, which we should, we want it to be high efficiency so that we're not having to weatherize it a year later and contributing more emissions to the state. So making that really a key part of everyone's kind of worldview, I think, is really important. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really valuable. And it sounds like, as far as capacity goes, that additional support and guidance at the regional level or at an accessible level for municipalities would be really helpful. Cassandra? Cassandra, I see you have your hand up. Oh, it went down. We have Ben in the comment saying, seconds Lowry's comment about the need for more capacity in RPCs to assist towns. And that is definitely something we heard at the session earlier today. It's definitely a common theme. Do any of the subcommittee members have any, things they want to add there, or additional information?
Can I add something, Marlena? So one of the things that would be helpful to get feedback on too is, so often the funding that we get to support towns, comes through the legislature, or sometimes it originates at the federal level. And we have explicit directions about what we're supposed to support towns with, as opposed to having more, I guess, freedom to do what our towns say they want and need. So I guess the question is, do you feel like you're getting the full array of support that you need to do what you feel like you need to do, or do you feel like too often the support is preconditioned on other needs that are being expressed by other entities? And maybe you can't answer that question.
Who are you asking that question to?
The municipalities. Do you feel like you're able to kind of get because oftentimes when we come to municipalities, it's like, hey, we have resources to help you with this. But do you feel like you're getting the full support that you need, or do you feel like the assistance is too constrained?
That's a good question. So I'm the chairperson for our Conservation and Trails Committee, and I'm also a member of the our Economic Development Commission here in Essex. And as a committee, we're only advisories, so it's difficult to do things. We give plenty of advice, and it's sometimes paid attention to, sometimes not. So we're trying to become, and I think the state's already done this, they're in statutes, a conservation commission is defined, and we're going to attempt to become one. I'm not sure there's anything for you to do to help with that. Maybe once we do become a commission, be able to do more and won't need as much dependence on our staff and other committees and commissions. So I'm not sure there's much else that could be done. Maybe make grants available once we do become a commission. That might be something that we could avail ourselves of. I see Lorraine from my town. Lorraine Zaloom has her hand up, and I'll defer to her. She's got some ideas, I'm sure.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. I think what would be helpful is education. The gentleman who spoke earlier, speaks of the lack of expertise, the cost to towns certainly to receive that. I know that the VCLT also, is there as a support system for grant writing and things like that. But we see that our staff is at capacity and the staff fluctuates in post-COVID world. Certainly staff fluctuated a lot. So I think we find, and I don't know if people know, but Essex Junction left our municipality. So we also struggled with separation as well. Feel like we're finally on some solid footing. But again, what I see is one of the major stumbling blocks is we have a planning commission that has not really participated fully in planning around transportation. The things that are suggested in statute aren't done. They're not shall. And really, to me, all planning commissions should be required and have oversight to require that transportation is one of the leading concepts that needs to be developed and highly developed with expertise, because a lot of people that serve on those local commissions don't have expertise, certainly in engineering. We do have an engineer on staff, but again, we have staffing. The staffing has many other things. They're not always available. So when I see the roadblocks again, it's really related to the one that has most power in the municipalities, in my view, in Vermont, are the planning commissions. And there's not enough overlap between, say, the energy committee, because they're just advisory. So they don't really have any input. And to me, it should be really intersectional in terms of how Vermont sets up their governance at the municipal level, because there's no one to hold anyone's feet to the fire. We had, for example, they're really trying to push for that to be an industrial area. And when I look at what the Vermont has set up for transportation corridor, the one of the major arteries is now flooding at least twice a year, and it shuts down that corridor. So to me, for future planning, we shouldn't be using that as setting that up as an industrial area, because it's going to be a problem, very problematic, because it sits right by the Winooski, and there's an over 20% grade right on the hill there. Those kind of what we need help with in terms of investing time to educate those people who are making those decisions at the municipal level, because we lack so much expertise and future understanding. This should be required to have a 5 and a 10-year plan. It should be required to have the capital plan. I see the capital plan, we rely on our staff, as opposed to the planning commission developing their own capital plan, because now we have a phosphorus control plan that's unfunded. That's over $2 million that we have to now raise the funds for. Things like stormwater systems. I see no requirements for the stormwater systems to either be a closed system or to require them to have a deep filtration system in the area, or maybe perhaps to require gray water systems so that we recycle the water into our buildings, those kind of things. Along with what Ken's saying about transportation, we just got word that our bus line is going to be reduced. And we learned that the bus company, the way they were counting ridership was they had a person on the bus who had to be there and count people on the bus, which is crazy. I don't understand why the state hasn't actually got involved with in the Green Mountain busing service to set them up with some kind of electronic device to be able to have a real count.
And that was one day too, right? They only did one day.
They did one day. It was nuts. And I'm like, so as I learn these things, I think these are simple solutions that Vermont could certainly support if we're really serious about transportation and cutting emissions. Those are the things that really we could use that help now. We can, when I see our chair always pushes to have the scrub and the buffer zones cut down just because aesthetically it looks better. Those are areas for all our animals to run through, the corridors. But he has the power to be able to waive those, and he does. So really, to me, this is a planning commission. We need harder and faster rules and oversight, as well as developing, I lived in New Jersey for a long time. We developed a very robust system of inspections that paid for itself through the inspections and the permitting process. We should be requiring that to be set up and permitted. And we also need to find a way to collectively fund public lands for building in areas so that we don't have to rely on developers to do that. I don't know how to do that in micro banking or something, but we need more collectives to be able to make affordable housing close to where people work, so they don't have to travel all the way from 3 counties over to get to work. I worked at Lowe's. We had people traveling when I was at Lowe's over an hour to get to work. That contributes a lot to issues. To me, the job should be as close as possible to where you're going to work. Sorry, that was a lot to dump, but I've been thinking about this for a long time. Thanks.
Yeah, it was a lot of very, very valuable information and feedback. Thank you for that, Lorraine. And it seems like Ken wants to add something.
Only if there's nobody else with their hand up.
You're good.
Nobody else? All right, good. I don't want to monopolize. Timber, I want to say it again here because one thing that can be included in an action plan, I think, is encouraging not only the use of mass timber, but if agriculture isn't particularly productive here in Vermont because of our lovely climate, we have lots of trees and using those products. And if we have industry here, which could be encouraged to actually produce mass timber products to be used. There we go. Not only will it sequester carbon in the structure itself, but it would also prevent the usage of concrete, heavy uses. And we're actually looking at some of that here in Vermont. I think that there's this demonstration project that I see at the Fairbanks Museum, and you can imagine a structure like that. Look at all the non-steel and non-concrete that's going into that building. And I want to see those kinds of timbers produced here, so they don't have to be transported from Canada, where they're currently manufacturing them. So that's something that could definitely be done. We have the wood, and we just need the industry to produce the product right here and then transport it only within our state or elsewhere if necessary, but at least supply the building industry and encourage this sort of building in our state. I think that would go a long way towards helping with our climate emissions. Over.
Thank you, Ken. And I'm sorry, I appear to be having internet issues, so if I disappear, that is why. And I just wanted to point to Cassandra, comment in the chat about being concerned with kind of capacity with Hydro-Quebec and, understanding how much pressure is going to be put on the power that we currently get with the increasing of electrification and also increasing demand from other places, and the costs associated with that. And so that's a concern that we've heard many times. So something worth pointing out. Larry?
Yeah, thank you. I remembered another point that someone else here in town raised, which is making villages really a priority for any development, and making them bike and pedestrian friendly. Middlesex Village has Route 2 running right through it, and I know that there's been study into whether we could put in sidewalks, and I think it's really problematic given the state highway and the setbacks and the land use. So I think there's just a need for kind of helping small municipalities deal with those things and streamline processes around that. And if that were to happen, and we were again, promoting dense village housing, we'd be kind of checking several boxes at once for reducing fuel use. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Jane says she tried to walk from Red Hen to Roots recently and it was scary.
Marlena, can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Absolutely.
So the Vermont planning prerogative is maintaining a pattern of compact settlements surrounded by rural countryside. That's what it says in statute. But there's this tension now, right, between so much of our compact settlement exists in areas that are either, flood hazard areas, fluvial erosion hazard areas. And I'm curious, for the municipalities here, do you feel like you have the tools you need to explore how to evolve those compact settlements, both, responding to the historic villages, but thinking about how do you potentially grow up and away, not necessarily move the village, but how do you grow new areas of it up and away to accommodate, to create that compact settlement for all the good reasons that compact settlements are a principal planning goal, including greenhouse gas reduction, but also evolving them to respond to the new climate realities. Do you guys feel like you have the tools you need?
I suspect that we would be able to lean heavily on SAM and CVRPC, others at CVRPC, and I'm sure that they would have really good resources for us in that regard.
This is Kevin. I'm the chair of our select board in Little Old Sharon. And that was a good question just asked. We've talked about everything from how do we start to get town water and or sewer in our little town. And those are major questions and we don't even know where to start. So maybe that partially answers the question. I would hope our local RPC, which is Two Rivers Ottaquechee, could help with that. But I'm not sure about that. The other question I have is unrelated, is something we've talked about recently, is how do we legislate? So we are a town that does not have zoning, but how do we legislate, let's say a fairly large parcel of land? How could we possibly legislate not building in the middle of that parcel? So someone has 50 acres, 100 acres, to somehow encourage them to build near the road, not out in the middle of it, to break up all that land.
Any of our planners on here want to take that on, or Kevin, do you guys have zoning?
No.
That's the challenge is
Yeah.
is because if you have zoning, you could require what are actually called what are referred to as conservation subdivisions.
Yep.
Where you require more compact footprints and conservation of the and there are other tools to do that too. That's just one of the easy off the shelf ones, but it's hard to do that at a local level, especially with the loopholes in Act 250. We'll see what under the new act, what the tier 3 lands, what that identification of those tier 3 lands and how they'll actually be regulated. That's still kind of an open question. But at a municipal level, that's really what you would need to do is adopt zoning and regulate that to where you mandate those more that smaller, tighter footprint. But any other planners want to answer that? Alice,
it's the Z word in Sharon. We can't say that.
I can just say in towns without zoning where Act 250 is more prevalent, Act 250, the law that was passed last session, did a couple things. It created a road rule which would automatically trigger Act 250 oversight for any development that involves a driveway or road over 800 feet. So that's intended to somewhat keep development closer to roads. It also added 2 new criteria related to forest blocks and connecting habitat that the full details need to be worked out through rulemaking, but the intent is to promote clustering and more compact development in forested areas to prevent that sort of large consumption footprint that I think you're speaking to. So obviously Act 250 doesn't trigger for everything, but there were some changes made last year intended to address those sorts of issues.
Yes, I was going to mention that, but we did our preferred siting of housing development or a house. We actually, in our town plan and in our zoning regulations, we ask that the plans for development follow a particular pattern that leaves most of the forest area or large areas of land intact. And the way we started that was we first looked at our forested areas and our conserved land, and we identified what we considered 3 tiers of critical forest land. And there is one area of forest land where we don't allow development at all. The kind of middle layer and the least critical layer, there is development allowed. We don't allow large solar farms in one, clear cutting for large solar farms in one critical forest area, but we do allow for rooftop solar and larger solar farms in the less critical forest area. But we did, again, had to do it in our town plan. We started there and then moved it into our zoning regulations. So you might want to start with the town plan because the town plan is really the overall look at your town and your land use. Your land use is defined in that town plan. And that could be an area where, at least at a high level, you could mitigate that kind of development. And I was going to say about wood, about tree harvesting. There is in Act 171 is the natural rural resources chapter that goes into your town plan. And in it, you describe, at least we did, we identified all our critical habitat area and our critical forest areas so that we knew what we needed to maintain the habitat paths. And then from there, also in 171, there is a requirement that providing for some kind of managed tree harvesting for development of wood products. That's also in Act 171. There are provisions for that kind of harvesting because it is an economy and a business area. So you can, but would have to follow some loose regulations in doing it. There are best practices for wood harvesting, and any logger you come up with would have to put everything back the way it was when they first started. So those are kind of the things that I can offer as help, and also that there is wood harvesting available.
Thank you for that additional information. Megan, I saw you had your hand up. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
Oh, it was just in relation to kind of this discussion about if you don't have zoning, what approaches can you take? I mean, we have a lot of towns in Loyal without zoning, so, their, say, natural resources section of their town plan, their strategies might be more educational based. If they don't have zoning, like promoting the current use program, for example, trying to connect maybe those landowners that have those priority forest blocks with like Vermont Land Trust or Vermont River Conservancy, local, conservation organizations, and just connect them with those folks to understand the importance of protecting those areas if they were to take that route. So it's just, you could always take the educational route, but of course it's all up to the landowner at the end of the day as to what they decide to do with the property.
That's really helpful, Megan. Thank you.
And I guess just related to that, I have to be the one that brings up the local tax base issue, but I'm all for protecting priority forest blocks. I'm all for that kind of thing, where that makes sense, and it's a great strategy. But I think we also need, when we think about support, capacity is an issue, funding is an issue at the local level for projects, whether it's infrastructure, but also as we start to conserve more of this land, which again is a great idea. There's going to be that issue at the local level where people will bring up, oh, well, how are we making up this extra tax revenue that we're losing, from kind of all these properties being conserved and getting various tax breaks for that conservation. So it's just something that comes up, like I said, I'm totally supportive, but it's a conversation that we'll need to think about as we pursue Act 181 further.
Well, there's also something that needs to be considered as you're developing more units of housing in a compact settlement. I've listened to some municipalities ask, well, how much development is enough development? And yes, the towns can add to their grand lists, but the towns are also going to have to look at it and say, we have to offer more municipal services. Like I keep saying, biggest example is Waitsfield now allowing a third story if it's for an affordable apartment. Well, fire safety wise, we don't have a ladder truck. And what we have now would not effectively reach a fire on a third story. And you have to think about there's going to be other municipal services that are going to have to be expanded as you're adding density. So you've got to see what the trade-off is. Are we recognizing taxes or have to spend more money?
Yeah, that's really interesting, Alice. Thank you. Lorraine, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, great points, Alice, and the lady who spoke before that. Is there a way that you, to me, in terms of taxes, the revenue and the outgoing and the cost, is there a way to come up with some formula, some basic formula that shows growth in terms of all the variables that cost money as opposed to the incoming money that you get from the taxes in the grand list? Because it's hard when I look at how we're set up in terms of our capital fund. We have some of our capital financing right in our general fund kind of, and really to me, all capital funds should be kept separate, because then it's really much easier for us to understand what the real cost of running a town is compared to wanting to build up more. Because the other thing I see happening here that's a struggle is I'm not convinced that we need to build as much as we need to build. I see so many Airbnbs popping up, and I see, like, right across from the street from me, the gentleman next door has bought a ton of houses that he's taken offline and turned into rentals as opposed to families for single families and growing up. So I would love to see a better kind of data crunching and data gathering at statewide level. I think there was talk about rental registries and so on and so forth in terms of what's also healthy for a town for rental as opposed to ownership too, because ownership brings another level of stability to the local economy as well. And keep just seeing in Chittenden County more and more rentals go out. And the other thing, do we have programs in mind for subsidizing or encouraging truck transportation, electrification of trucks in terms of the transportation and service sector? Because I live right on Route 15. The other thing that happens with diesel trucks is the poisoning of not only our waters. Essex Right on Route 15 is one that I think it is the heaviest traveled road in Vermont, other than maybe perhaps 89. But we have open stormwater systems. There's 3 stormwaters right by my house that are connected. And then there's a 12-inch drain that dumps directly into one of the tributaries right into the Winooski. And Vermont's now using brine as well, which poisons the systems too. We had to close the Indian Brook down because green algae has now bloomed for the last 2 weeks there. Not seen that at this time of year, but it's happening. So do we have any kind of encouragement? Because to me, in terms of transportation, that's something that could be done pretty quickly if we help get the big trucks, the diesel trucks, to be converted into electrification. Is there any kind of shove for industry? And is there any shove for industry to, since we always talk about residential, to winterize and weatherize? My business, we have a big warehouse and it is not weatherized. And I see a ton of warehouse businesses and those warehouses are not winterized or weatherized. So where are we with trying to get the businesses to also do that? Because to me, those are those tax dollars I'm going to have to take out of my pocket because the industry is not going to pay for that. I'm the one who ends up paying for that. And so when we look at the balance sheet of taxes, and also they often get the tax breaks, I would love to see you guys somehow figure out some formula that we can kind of plug into and understand smart growth as opposed to just growing things for the grand list. Thanks.
And I would love to have some people respond. Ken, do you want to add your comment and then we can go to maybe get some feedback and some answers on those questions?
Yes, I'll be quick, I think, this time, I hope. So getting back to the use of agricultural land, I just want to suggest that you look at requiring solar farms, which are becoming much more popular. When solar farms go in, oftentimes that's the end of the use of that land because the panels prevent anything else from going on there. There are places in the country that are experimenting with what they call agrivoltaics, where the solar panels are raised and spread far enough apart that you can still have other activities on that land. So I would really like to see policies that encourage that sort of use of land when it comes to putting in solar farms. And I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Lorraine was saying on the transportation, especially for trucks. And, I think I mentioned it earlier, I have a tiny investment in a hydrogen-based company, and not so much because I'm making a lot of money on it, but because I put my money where my mouth is. I think hydrogen is a really good solution for that particular problem, for trucking and municipal buses, the kinds of facilities, the kind of transportation that it's generally refueled locally and cannot tolerate the long refueling times that electric batteries require. So I really love to see policies that might encourage for certain applications the use of green hydrogen, of course. I'm only talking green hydrogen. I think that would be great. As you know, Beta in South Burlington is working on electric battery-powered aircrafts. And it turns out that hydrogen actually is more dense per pound. So where weight is really sensitive, that's another potentially good application. And I actually spoke with those folks, and they're moderately looking at it at this point. They're pretty invested in batteries now, but the state could encourage that, and that might give them a second look. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Ken. So on any of those kind of questions, comments, did anyone have kind of answers or feedback, that cost benefit analysis that Lorraine was talking about of growth and how to kind of foresee what the costs and what the benefits are?
I guess I would just say that I think everything you've mentioned is certainly something people are interested in, from weatherizing large commercial buildings to electrifying medium and heavy duty fleet. These are just incredibly costly and endeavors where all the technology is not quite there. So all this work is going to require some level of investment. And I think part of the challenge the council is struggling with right now and what we're seeking feedback on are what are the highest and best priorities for the life of this next plan, the kind of 5-year planning horizon, where we could encourage investment and action that both makes meaningful progress on climate change and ideally has co-benefits that help other public policy goals. So, that is the challenge that's before us. There's lots of levers to pull, but what are the most feasible and cost effective ones in the near term?
Thank you for that, Billy. Sam?
Hi all. I tried not to say anything and just listen, but I would be remiss if I just didn't emphasize again that I think community infrastructure is increasingly important. We're seeing as we're facing more and more moments when more and more folks are relying on our town volunteers and our town staff and our town buildings and facilities. We're seeing a lot of that certainly in Central Vermont, and I know there are other places in the state are as well. And we have known need here, and we have known barriers in terms of using economy of scale for procurement in terms of a central sort of grant management or sort of even application assistance body. Upfront cost coverage is a huge issue especially for these large projects and the way that funding is often split between the different phases of projects. So you might get to a certain point and then have to again start all the way at the beginning if some time lapses, whether there's turnover at the local, regional, or state level. So I think making sure that we're utilizing those lists of known need and projects first and foremost, and then ensuring that we're really investing in that community infrastructure would be really key. And I say that both in the context of the flooding, but also in the context of our very high rate of winter storms, which affects a lot of folks in terms of very long-term outages. And so just keeping in mind flexibility of programs, but also maybe the programs can be more stable and we can figure out some of the funding on the backside, I think would be helpful for accessing those if there's a little bit more stability year after year. I think oftentimes you get calls, oh, I'm ready for this, I'm so excited for this, and it's over basically. And so I just really want to emphasize anything we can do to streamline some of these programs and address existing need. We've had a lot of listening sessions. There's a lot of planning documents out there, and also a lot of planning that's not attached to implementation funds. And so maybe using that economy of scale either in procurement and or in grant management could be really useful. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sam. And I just want to point to that link that you shared. The data on property transfers is really fascinating. So that's worth taking a look. And Sam put that in the chat. And Lorraine was mentioning planting trees on bare riverbanks and on private property and just getting that done. Lowry?
Yeah, thank you. To piggyback on Sam's point about volunteers, I think most towns or regions have volunteer energy committees and the like, who are itching to do good things. And so the more that they can pick up a cookbook on how to do X, Y, or Z, and also to know what the highest priority things are, and to have kind of a coherent set of guidance that is kind of feels like it's a statewide, that there is statewide momentum behind it. So whether that's EV chargers or affordable housing or whatever, but just feeling like we're not just out there in the wilderness alone trying to figure one thing out while no one else is daunting. And so as much as this plan can kind of prioritize things or provide just kind of easier pathways to action would be wonderful. Thank you.
Go to Sam first, please. Oh,
I think she's just thumbs
he's just
up.
thumbing up, not him.
I was just thumbsing up.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Really crucial. Ken?
Okay, thank you. I want to talk about money now. I hope that the next update does something to address some of the almost opposite intents, or the intents are just backwards versus the policies. A great example is, we have we want electric vehicles, but since they're not paying the gas tax, we now charge them extra to get inspected. Well, that's backwards, I think. Yes, I understand that roads have to be maintained. I think that taxing vehicles that we're trying to encourage is not the right way to approach that. The other thing that's important to remember is that, like I said this earlier, that when you encouraging housing is important and needs to be done, but at the same time, you have to recognize that that's going to exacerbate climate problems in lots of different ways. So I really hope that you look at some of the monetary policy, the tax policies, and how we fund things. The Home Act is a great example where a large burden of the reduction in using of propane is going to be borne by people that are lower income. Not a good way to go about it. I think that we can do better, and I hope that we can.
Thank you, Ken. And so we're
Any
going
thoughts
to
on alternative sources for like the EV registration fee? Like, where do you have a sense from a municipal perspective where that revenue replacement should come from?
Certainly. I definitely am in favor of anything that's progressive, something that would have folks and industries that are profiting or have more money in general would shoulder that burden. I would favor the income tax.
Thanks.
And so we're going to start to move towards wrap up. So if anyone has any final thoughts they want to share, now is a great time to do that. And then I'll hand it back over to Jane.
Marlene, I know we only have a couple seconds left, and appreciate that last bit on funding. I appreciate Billy raising that funding looms large in all of these recommendations. And I just named that one other tension I think we're seeing in formulating our recommendations are the extent to which to rely on incentives and policies that encourage the behavior we want. And we can see that in building energy codes, we can see it in weatherization, we can see it in transportation, versus a more mandate and rule-based structure. Again, we don't have a lot of time, but would welcome input from the municipalities on preferred policy approaches. There, I'll leave it at that.
If you don't mind, if I chime in, I work with Efficiency Vermont, and I also work with the new GMP gas program. And I have to say I'm a bit alarmed by our gas incentivizing, given one that's a fossil fuel. I understand it's a transitional fuel, but what I see is that we are incentivizing big developers putting in gas appliances as opposed to electric appliances. And appliances take a while to age out. And I just think that is really a wrong approach. The vendor that I work with is from California, and even the vendors agree that's a poor approach. So my concern is certainly is that GMP, and looking at the committee level work and their oversized influence on some of the policies and decision making, are alarming to me. I also am alarmed too because in Vermont we're pretty loose with installation, and I am seeing more gas explosions across the country because we don't have great oversight in Vermont. We never really build it in. And I personally would prefer to see that program end and to put more money into electric utilities and appliances as opposed. I see certainly with the heat pumps, we sell a lot of heat pumps. I don't know what your view is on that, but to me, it's a very successful program in terms of incentivizing, helping those people that can't really afford, because it is $12,000 to $18,000 to $20,000 install. So really, that when we see what the big drivers are, is poverty is a big driver of climate issues, and really we need to help the people that can't afford and incentivize those more. The big developers, I'm happy to have them help them somewhat, but they really don't need my help. I know, I see where they live. We're helping the wrong people. Thanks.
And I'll add, so impact fees might be another source of revenue as well. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was a short but very rich last little bit of the conversation. I'm going to hand it back over to you, Jane.
Thanks, Marlena, and thanks to everybody for participating tonight. I'm going to actually just orient you to some of the work that's happening sort of concurrently out of the Climate Action Office that I think serves to complement initiatives such as a climate action plan that is really a state plan looking at how we touch on municipalities, but we have some really specific work happening in the Climate Action Office and A&R in partnership with regional planning commissions and other entities in state government that I think would be of interest to you all. So before I turn it back to Liz Ambler in the Climate Action Office to let you know how you can stay engaged, I wanted to highlight 3 projects specifically. So I heard through Chris Campany's orientation to the actions being considered by Rural Resilience and Adaptation, a reference to the Municipal Vulnerability Indicators tool. This is was a requirement of the agency to develop actually one of those broader components of the Global Warming Solutions Act that looked at how we would map vulnerabilities at the municipal level with respect to climate hazards and impacts. We look at both social and infrastructure vulnerabilities and look at that from a way that you can turn those layers on and off and make some educated planning and decisions in your own town about where to direct climate action. That tool we are now supporting also with a grant to RPCs. Regional planning commissions have put together pilot municipalities where they've looked at how you could apply using a tool like this to inform planning and action. They've done that for roughly 5 municipalities in every regional planning commission territory. We are now sort of coming to the end of that project, but RPCs also have capacity now in the training to support municipalities in both referencing the guide that they've put together, but also accessing support to actually apply that tool to your own municipality. So I encourage you to reach out to RPCs, and as that project sort of that culmination of the templates and tools that RPCs put together comes to an end, we'll be looking to put that on our website to make readily available as well. We're also required in the Global Warming Solutions Act to develop a municipal climate toolkit. This has been a project that's sort of lagged over the last few years, but with some renewed investment and ability to work through our some website support that we have at our Climate Action Office, we'll be hoping to finish this up in the next 6 months. This is really a place that's intended to be a landing page where municipalities can leverage, hopefully, capacity by sort of the tools leveraged there. Financial resources, state agencies, other tools, other planning kits. And we're hopeful that also through that, we'll be able to link it and provide capacity also to RPCs to support that work. And finally, and actually what we feel like is really a direct result of the initial climate action plan was we heard from a lot of municipalities after the 2021 plan came out about how can we take this climate action plan and scale it to our municipalities. And while we might have specific recommendations in the plan that are targeted at municipalities, it really is a state plan, a plan, I should say, in service of state implementation and legislative implementation. And so we're now advancing the development of a municipal climate planning framework that looks at 2 sort of phases of the work. One, we know we all have kind of planning fatigue, or I'll just speak for myself. I have planning fatigue, and I actually would rather see folks moving to action. And so we're looking at how to sort of support municipalities in seeing all the tools that they have in front of them, the plans they already do, the spending documents, the budgets they put together every year. So how can you leverage those resources that you're already undertaking to drive climate action? That's the framework. And then we know that there are still going to be some of those sort of overachiever towns and towns who really want to do their own specific plan to involve their community members and others in that decision and process. And so we'll also be providing a template and a tool for how to develop a municipal climate plan that also looks at sample actions, recommendations that we hope would be supportive of municipal level action. So that's a process that we're doing actually closely also with RPCs, where RPCs are providing that technical guidance and input, since RPCs know municipalities better than the state does, in that they work with them all the time. They see the tools, they know the plans, they often are the ones helping to support towns in writing them. So we'll be working really closely with RPCs on that project as well. And we're just kicking that off. And it has a 2-year horizon, but I think it's so exciting, and it'll be well timed after we finalize this climate action plan to hopefully support municipalities in driving climate action. So with that, I want to turn it over to Liz to highlight how you can stay involved in the work going forward and learn more about the Climate Council's work to update the plan.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. And yeah, we're going to be sharing out different ways to stay involved in the climate action plan process and climate action in Vermont. We have a signing up for our e-newsletter, where you could hear about upcoming events and meetings and opportunities, stay engaged. We also have a calendar online where you could browse through and select dates and meetings to join. They'll have Zoom links on them and recordings if maybe you want to go back and see old meetings, and so on. And then we also have a link to share your thoughts. So whether it's from tonight, or just if you have an idea in the future and you want to share your thoughts to folks working on the climate action plan, you could submit a form there, or you could give us a call. And I think that's, Jane, unless there is anything else, then I think that's it. And just, we're really grateful for your time with us tonight and hearing your thoughts and engagement in climate action in Vermont. So thank you.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks to Marlena for facilitating a robust conversation.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.